New York City, 1849. A well-dressed gentleman walks up to a stranger on Broadway, smiles warmly, chats for a minute like an old friend, and then asks one simple question. Have you confidence in me to trust me with your watch until tomorrow? And here's the insane part. People said yes! They handed a total stranger their gold watch. He tipped his hat, walked around the corner, and evaporated. His name was William Thompson, and when the newspapers finally caught up with him, they needed a word for what he was. They called him the confidence man. Con man! That's it, that's where the word comes from. Not from convict, not from conniving, from confidence. Because that is the entire crime. He doesn't steal your watch, he gets you to hand it over, smiling. Tonight, we're going on a tour of the greatest con artists who ever lived. People who sold the Eiffel Tower, sold the Brooklyn Bridge, sold an entire country that did not exist. And before you feel smug, before you think I would never fall for this, I need to ruin something for you. The victims weren't stupid. They were bankers, judges, engineers. Al Capone fell for one. The smarter you think you are, the better a mark you make. Because confidence works both ways. The con artist borrows yours. Psychologists who study fraud keep finding the same uncomfortable thing. Cons don't attack your intelligence. They attack your emotions. Greed, fear, loneliness, hope. And once an emotion is driving, intelligence just rides along in the back seat, nodding. Every con in history runs on the same three-stroke engine. First, the put-up. Pick the right victim, someone who wants something. Second, the play. Tell them a story where they're the lucky insider, the special one, the exception. Third, the touch. Take the money. And if you're truly great, the victim never even reports it, because reporting it means admitting they believe the story. Shame is the con artist's insurance policy. Remember Mr. Thompson from Broadway? When he finally stood trial, some of his victims refused to testify. Too embarrassed. A crime where the evidence apologizes and stays home? That's the confidence game. And humans have been playing it for a very, very long time. There's a scam letter from 16th century Spain. The Spanish prisoner. A mysterious letter claiming a wealthy nobleman is locked in a dungeon, and if you just send a little money to free him, he'll reward you with a fortune and his beautiful daughter. Sound familiar? It should. It's the Nigerian prince email 400 years before email. Same script, same bait. We never patch the vulnerability because the vulnerability is us. So pour yourself something warm, get comfortable, and let's meet the masters. Starting with the most audacious con ever attempted by a single human being. A man who looked at the London Stock Exchange, the most sophisticated financial market on earth, and thought, I bet I could sell these people a country. One more thing about the birth of the con, because the timing is too perfect. The same decade New York named the confidence man, P.T. Barnum was building his museum empire uptown. And Barnum gets credited with the line, there's a sucker born every minute. Here's the joke inside the joke. He never said it. Historians have never found it anywhere in his writings. The most famous quote about gullibility is itself a fabrication. A little counterfeit coin passed hand to hand for a century and a half, accepted by everyone, checked by no one. Even the words about cons are cons. Meanwhile, the actual mechanics of Thompson's watch trick got industrialized. Con men developed the pigeon drop. You find a wallet full of cash on the street, a helpful stranger appears, and somehow, 20 minutes later, you've handed over your own money as good faith to claim a share of the found fortune. It still runs today, word for word, in every major city. The props change. The found wallet is sometimes a winning lottery ticket now, but the machine underneath hasn't needed a single new part since the gaslight era. Remember that as we go. You're not about to watch a history of extinct animals. Every species in this museum is still breeding. London, 1821. Into the fanciest drawing rooms of the British Empire walks a Scottish soldier named Gregor MacGregor. He's got medals, he's got war stories from fighting alongside Simón Bolívar in South America. Some of them even true. And he's got a title nobody's ever heard of. His Serene Highness, the Cazique of Poyais. Poyais, he explains, is his country, a lush paradise on the Mosquito Coast of Central America, 8 million acres of it, granted to him by a native king. The soil grows 3 harvests a year. The rivers, he says, literally have gold in them. The capital, St. Joseph, has boulevards, a cathedral, an opera house, and a bank. And London loses its mind. Remember, this is the golden age of colonial investment. Everyone's getting rich on bonds from new South American republics. So why not Poirier? McGregor opens a Poirier office in London. He sells Poirier government bonds, raising a loan of £200,000. Serious institutional money. He sells plots of Poirier land to families. He prints and exchanges official Poirier dollars, beautiful, crisp banknotes for real British sterling. There's a 350-page guidebook to Poirier written by a Captain Thomas Strangeways, full of maps and detailed descriptions of the harbor and the friendly locals. McGregor wrote it himself. There's a Poirier national anthem, a Poirier honor system. He knights people. He designs uniforms. This man built an entire country the way other people build model train sets. Except his model train set was traded on the London Stock Exchange. And here is where the story stops being funny, because in late 1822, ships actually sailed. Around 250 emigrants, Scottish families, doctors, shoemakers, a banker who'd been promised a job running the Bank of Poirier, packed their savings, converted them to Poirier dollars, and crossed the Atlantic to start new lives. They arrived at the Mosquito Coast and found jungle. No boulevards, no opera house, no St. Joseph, nothing but swamp, mosquitoes, and a couple of abandoned huts. They kept waiting for the city to be around the next bend of the river. It never was. Stranded through the rainy season, they started dying. Malaria, yellow fever, despair. One man, the would-be royal shoemaker of Poirier, took his own life. Of the 250 or so who sailed, roughly 180 died. Fewer than 50 ever made it home. And when the survivors' stories hit the London papers, here's the twist that tells you everything about human nature. Some of them defended McGregor. He must have been deceived by his agents, they said. The cazique would never lie. McGregor, meanwhile, had quietly relocated to Paris, where he, I promise this is true, ran the entire scam again. French investors, French settlers, a new Poirier constitution. The French actually arrested him and put him on trial. He was acquitted. He eventually retired to Venezuela, where he was welcomed as a hero of the Independence War, given a general's pension. And when he died in 1845, he was buried with full military honors in Caracas Cathedral. The man who killed 180 people with a fictional country died a decorated national hero. The bonds he sold, some of them still exist. Collectors pay good money for them. Paper from a country that never was, still worth something. Somewhere, the cazique is smiling. A few details of the Poyass operation deserve their own display case, because the craftsmanship was genuinely magnificent. Those Poyass banknotes weren't printed in some back alley. McGregor commissioned them from the official engraver who printed banknotes for the Bank of Scotland. Real security printing for fake money from a fictional country. The land certificates were sold at offices in London and Edinburgh with printed price schedules, around 2 shillings 3 pence per acre, discounts for veterans. There were recruiting posters, there were songs, ballads about the sweet Poirier climate, sung in Scottish pubs to drum up emigrants. And when the survivors came back and the scandal broke, McGregor's response was to sue his own agents for defamation, attack as defense, a move every cornered fraudster has used since. But the detail that haunts me is this. Decades later, long after the deaths, long after the French trial, McGregor was still periodically issuing new Poirier land certificates from wherever he happened to be living. Smaller batches, humbler paper, like a band well past its prime, still playing the old hit. The last known Poirier's paper dates from the late 1830s. He kept selling the dream for 15 years after the dream had a body count, and people kept, occasionally, buying. The con artist's true addiction is rarely the money, it's the yes. April 1817, a village in the English countryside. A young woman appears on a cottage doorstep, exotic looking, exhausted, wearing a black turban, and speaking a language absolutely nobody can understand. The local magistrate's wife takes her in. Through gestures and a very convenient Portuguese sailor who claims he can translate, her story emerges. She is Princess Caribou from the island kingdom of Javasu in the Indian Ocean, kidnapped by pirates, escaped by leaping overboard, swam ashore. England melts. For 10 glorious weeks, Princess Caribou is the toast of high society. She fences on the lawn. She swims naked in the lake, as one does in Javasu.
She prays to a god she calls Allah Ta'ala. She writes in a mysterious script that scholars examine very seriously. Oxford men study her language. Her portrait is painted. And then a boarding house keeper in Bristol sees that portrait in the newspaper and says, "Hang on, that's not a princess. That's Mary. Mary Wilcox, a servant girl from Devon, a cobbler's daughter who'd been fired from half the kitchens in Bristol. The invented language? Gibberish she'd practiced. The exotic script? Doodles. And here's my favorite part. Society wasn't even angry. They were impressed. She'd fooled linguists and lords with nothing but commitment to the bit." They paid her passage to America, where she toured briefly as, what else, Princess Caribou, exhibiting herself as the woman who fooled England. She eventually came home and spent her last decades respectively selling leeches to a Bristol hospital. From princess to leech merchant. Career arcs were different back then. But the princess business has a darker franchise. July 1918, the Russian imperial family, Tsar Nicholas, the Empress, and their 5 children are executed by Bolsheviks in a basement in Yekaterinburg. Almost immediately, a rumor spreads like a virus. One daughter survived. Anastasia, the youngest Grand Duchess. And in 1920, a young woman is pulled out of a canal in Berlin after a suicide attempt. No papers, won't say who she is. In the asylum, another patient looks at her and gasps. It's her! It's Anastasia! For the next 60 years, this woman, she goes by Anna Anderson, is the center of the greatest identity dispute of the 20th century. And I need you to understand, she was good. She had scars, she knew details of palace life that stunned surviving Romanov relatives. Some family members embraced her sobbing. Others called her a fraud after one meeting. Her case ground through German courts from 1938 to 1970, the longest civil case in German legal history, and ended, incredibly, in a draw. Identity neither proven nor disproven. She married an American professor, lived in Virginia surrounded by dozens of cats, and died in 1984, still insisting she was the daughter of the Tsar. 10 years later, DNA testing finally existed. They tested a hospital tissue sample against the Romanov remains and against living relatives, including Prince Philip. Result? Not a Romanov, not even close. The DNA matched a missing Polish factory worker named Franciszka Szankowska. 60 years. She held the role for 60 years through courtrooms and newspapers and true believers who went to their graves certain. And it's entirely possible that somewhere along the way, she stopped acting. That's the terrifying thing about the princess business. Play a part long enough, and the mask grows into the face. The real Anastasia, by the way, never left that basement. Her remains were finally identified in 2007. The rumor outlived the girl by 90 years. The princess business has one more exhibit, and it's the heavyweight champion of the entire category. Russia, 1604. A young man appears in Poland claiming to be Dmitri, the youngest son of Ivan the Terrible, a boy the entire world knew had died years earlier. He raises an army, marches on Moscow, and this actually happened. He wins. The false Dmitri was crowned Tsar of Russia. An imposter sat on the throne of the largest country on earth for nearly a year, married a princess, ran the government, before the nobles finally turned, stormed the Kremlin, and killed him. And here's where Russian history goes full fever dream. Within a couple of years, another false Dmitri appeared, claiming to be the first false Dmitri miraculously survived. Same dead prince, now 2 imposters deep. He raised his own army and set up a rival court outside Moscow. And after him came a third. Historians literally number them like sequels, false Dmitri 1, 2, and 3. The first one remains, as far as we know, the only con artist in history whose scam's grand prize was an actual empire. Anna Anderson wanted recognition and a pension. Dmitri #1 wanted the crown of Russia. And for 11 glorious months, the line to kiss his ring went out the door. When people tell you the princess business doesn't scale, it scales.
There's an old American insult. If you believe that, I've got a bridge to sell you. Tonight, you learn where it comes from. New York around the turn of the 20th century. Immigrants are pouring through Ellis Island, thousands a week, many carrying their life savings, all of them drunk on one idea. In America, anything can be bought, and any man can own something magnificent. Waiting for them is George C. Parker. Parker's product is the Brooklyn Bridge. Yes, the Brooklyn Bridge, the most famous structure in America. His pitch is beautiful. The city is selling it off, and the new owner can get rich charging tolls.
He has an office. He has forged deeds, gorgeous ones with seals and ribbons. He has fake city officials who drop by mid-negotiation. Depending on the buyer's wallet, the bridge costs anywhere from $75 to $50,000. And legend has it, he sold it over and over and over for years. The detail that makes this legend immortal, more than once, police had to physically stop new owners from erecting toll booths on their bridge. Picture that morning. You've bought the Brooklyn Bridge. You've hired 2 guys. You're setting up your toll booth, dreaming of fortunes, and a cop strolls up and asks what exactly you think you're doing. That conversation happened. Parker didn't stop at the bridge. He sold the Statue of Liberty. He sold Madison Square Garden. He sold the Metropolitan Museum of Art. His masterpiece was Grant's tomb, the mausoleum of President Ulysses S. Grant, which he sold while posing as Grant's grandson. Sometimes he'd set up a fake office inside the property he was selling because nothing says legitimate owner like having the keys. He wasn't alone in this golden age of selling things you don't own. A rival, Reed Waddell, ran the gold brick game. A lead brick plated in gold with a real gold plug in the corner for the assayer to drill. Buyers tested the plug, paid for the brick. And across the Atlantic, a Scotsman named Arthur Ferguson allegedly sold Nelson's Column, Big Ben, and Buckingham Palace to American tourists. £6,000 for the palace, a bargain. The pattern is always the same. Don't sell people a lie. Sell them the thing they already believe, that everything has a price and that today they're the lucky one who got there first. Parker's luck ran out in 1928. 3rd felony conviction. And under New York's new repeat offender law, that meant life. They sent him to Sing Sing, up the river, in the prison that gave us the phrase. And here's the ending Hollywood wouldn't dare write. He loved it there. He spent his final 8 years as the prison's most popular resident, entertaining guards and inmates with the greatest hits, the bridge, the statue, the tomb. He died in 1936, a legend on both sides of the bars. The Brooklyn Bridge, for the record, has never been for sale. But if you're ever on it, look at the pedestrian walkway and remember, somewhere in the crowd, there's always a Parker. And somewhere else, always a toll booth waiting to be built. One more New York artifact before we leave the bridge. Parker had a colleague/rival in the landmark trade, William McCloundy. O.U. O'Brien, who did prison time for selling the Brooklyn Bridge too. So the bridge had at least 2 independent sales teams working it. And the trade had proper infrastructure. Steerers worked the docks in Ellis Island, spotting fresh arrivals with savings, learning their language, befriending them for days before ever mentioning the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The fake offices were rented by the week, furnished by the con. Official portraits on the wall, a busy clerk, rubber stamps. Rubber stamps were the special effects department of the Golden Age. Victims later told police they believed because the papers had so many stamps. And the sales weren't cruel jokes at random. They were priced with care. Parker reportedly took whatever the mark had, $75 from a laborer, thousands from a shopkeeper, half down and a payment plan if needed. A con artist offering financing. When New York's courts finally shipped him upstate for good, the newspapers wrote him up almost fondly, the way you eulogize a retiring ball player. The city that invented the confidence man had developed a strange civic pride in owning the best one. Nobody erected a statue of George Parker. Then again, knowing him, he'd have sold it.
Hydesville, New York, 1848, a farmhouse. Two little girls, Kate and Maggie Fox, 11 and 14, tell their mother the house is haunted. There are knocking sounds, raps, and the raps answer questions. One knock for no, two for yes. The neighbors come, the raps spell out a story. A peddler murdered in this very house, buried in the cellar. But girl's much older sister Leah hears about this, and I want you to note her reaction. She does not call a priest, she calls a booking agent. Within months, the Fox sisters are performing public seances in rented halls. Within a few years, spirit rapping has exploded into a full-blown religious movement, spiritualism. Seances in candlelit parlors, mediums in every city, table tipping, spirit trumpets, ectoplasm. At its peak, spiritualism claimed millions of believers across America and Europe. Table tipping, spirit trumpets, ectoplasm. At its peak, spiritualism claimed millions of believers across America and Europe, including judges, senators, scientists, and eventually the widowed Queen Victoria's entire grieving generation. Every war made it bigger. After the Civil War, after World War I, millions of mothers wanted one more word with their sons, and the ghost business was there to sell it at $1 a sitting. So how were the Fox sisters doing it? Hold that thought for 40 years. October 1888, New York Academy of Music. Maggie Fox, now middle-aged, broke, and furious at her sister Leah, walks onto a stage in front of 2,000 people, takes off her shoe, puts her stockinged foot on a wooden stool, and demonstrates. Crack! Crack! She was cracking her toe joints. That was it. That was the whole technology. Two little girls who could pop their toes loudly and an older sister who knew how to sell it had accidentally founded a religion. Maggie told the papers everything. How they'd started it to prank their superstitious mother, how Leah turned it into a business, how there was no going back once thousands of grieving people believed. The confession changed almost nothing. Spiritualists simply decided the confession was fake. She'd been bribed or the spirits were testing them. Maggie, desperate for money, later recanted the confession. Both sisters died within a few years, penniless. The movement they invented outlived them by a century. Enter the ghost business's greatest enemy, Harry Houdini. In the 1920s, the world's most famous magician went to war with the mediums. His logic was airtight. I am a professional deceiver, so I know exactly how these people are doing it. He attended seances in disguise with a police officer and a reporter, springing up mid-session to shout, "I am Houdini and you are a fraud!" Possibly history's greatest party entrance. He exposed the famous Boston medium Marjorie, whose spirit tricks were worth a fortune. He offered $10,000 to any medium whose effects he couldn't replicate. Nobody ever collected. And this crusade cost him his best friend, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, the most rational detective in literature. Doyle was a spiritualism true believer. He believed mediums. He believed two schoolgirls who photographed paper cutout fairies in their garden. He wrote an entire book defending the Cottingley fairies. He even believed Houdini himself had supernatural powers and was just covering it up. The man who invented Sherlock Holmes, fooled by toe joints and paper fairies. Because remember the rule from Chapter 1. Cons don't attack intelligence. They attack emotion. Doyle had lost his son in the war. He didn't want evidence. He wanted his boy. The ghost business never really died, by the way. It just rebranded. Psychic hotlines, TV mediums with earpieces, an app store category. The raps still answer questions, as long as you keep paying per question. The ghost business also invented a product we should talk about, the spirit photograph. Boston, 1861. A jewelry engraver named William Mumler develops a self-portrait and finds a faint, ghostly figure beside him in the frame. A double exposure, an accident of sloppy plate cleaning. Mumler's reaction, which by now you can recite with me, was not, oops, but how much would people pay for this? He opened a studio photographing the bereaved with their departed loved ones, pale figures hovering behind the sitter, conveniently blurry. Business boomed through the Civil War, a war that manufactured grieving mothers by the 100,000. His most famous client came in 1872, veiled under a false name, Mary Todd Lincoln. The resulting photograph, the widow seated with a translucent Abraham Lincoln resting his hands on her shoulders, became the most famous spirit photograph ever taken. It still exists. You can look it up tonight. Maybe not right before sleeping. Mumler was eventually prosecuted for fraud in a sensational New York trial. T.B. Barnum himself testified against him, which is a bit like being called a cheat by a casino, and though acquitted, he died broke. The technology of comfort had one more century of upgrades coming. Seance trumpets, ectoplasm, which upon seizure by investigators kept turning out to be cheesecloth, sometimes swallowed and regurgitated for effect, then radio mediums, then television ones. Grief is the renewable resource. The extraction industry just updates its equipment. Denver, Colorado, the 1880s. A crowd gathers around a street vendor stand. A man with a magnificent black beard is selling soap. Ordinary soap, but with a twist. As the crowd watches, he wraps some bars with real money. 1s, 5s, 20s, and yes, a $100 bill. Then mixes them into the pile and sells the bars for $1 each. A lottery you can wash with. And look, a man in the crowd just won. He's waving a $100 bill, screaming with joy. That man, of course, works for the soap seller. Every winner works for the soap seller. The money-wrapped bars never leave his sleight-of-hand fingers. The crowd buys pile after pile of $1 soap worth a nickel. By the time a newspaper needed to write him up, the man had a permanent nickname, Soapy Smith. Jefferson Randolph Smith II, the closest thing the Wild West ever had to a CEO of crime. Because Soapy's genius wasn't the soap, it was scale. He built organizations. In Denver, then in the silver boomtown of Creede, he ran networks of shell game operators, card sharps, fake lottery offices, and sure thing men, all paying him a cut. All protected because Soapy paid the police and the politicians. He ran a saloon called the Tivoli Club with a Latin motto over the door. Caveat emptor. Buyer beware. He literally put the warning on the building. Nobody read Latin. Then came the Klondike Gold Rush, 1897. 100,000 people stampede toward the Yukon, and every single one of them funnels through one tiny Alaskan port, Skagway. Soapy looked at Skagway the way a wolf looks at a sheep funnel. Within months, he ran the town, and his masterpiece, his Sistine Chapel, was the telegraph office. A beautiful office where miners fresh off the boat could wire news home to their families. $5 a message. Money would arrive from home. Sometimes a reply came back. Collect, of course. Pay again. One small detail. Skagway had no telegraph line. None. The wires ran out the back of the building and stopped in the dirt. Every message went nowhere. The replies were written in the back room. Hundreds of homesick miners paid $5 to send telegrams into a wall. And while they waited for replies, friendly strangers invited them to a card game. His empire had a full org chart. The reliable packers who'd carry your gear and vanish. The fake freight office. The merchant's exchange that exchanged nothing. The preacher, a fake preacher, collecting for a church that would never be built. When the U.S. Army showed up to keep order, Soapy organized his own militia, made himself captain, and marched in the 4th of July parade as Grand Marshal on a white horse while the governor watched. That was July 4th, 1898. He had 4 days to live. Because on July 7th, his boys finally picked the wrong victim. A miner named John Stewart, just back from the Klondike with a sack of gold worth about $2,800. They took it in broad daylight. Skagway's respectable citizens, who'd been slowly organizing a vigilance committee, finally snapped. The town gathered on the Juneau Wharf. Soapy, drinking all afternoon, grabbed a Winchester and marched down to break up the meeting himself. Guard Frank Reed stepped in his way. Words? Then gunfire, almost simultaneous. Soapy died on the spot, shot through the heart. Reed died 12 days later. The town gave Reed a monument. He gave his life for the honor of Skagway. Soapy got a plain marker outside the cemetery fence. And yet, go to Skagway today, it's a cruise port. And the #1 tourist attraction, the thing everyone photographs, the name on the souvenir t-shirts, it's not Frank Reed. The con man won the merchandising war. They always do. Soapy's file has 2 more documents worth reading. First, the church. In early 1898, Skagway's respectable citizens started fundraising to build one. Civilization arriving at last. Soapy, the town's most prominent citizen, made a large and well-publicized donation. The fund grew to a healthy sum, at which point person or persons unknown robbed it in the night. The money, most historians agree, walked directly back into Soapy's pocket, minus his own donation, which means he effectively rented his reputation out at a profit and got a newspaper write-up praising his generosity as the seed money, philanthropy as a working capital loan. Second, the seance. After Soapy died on the wharf, his gang scattered and Skagway went straight, but the man refused to stay buried. For decades, admirers and descendants have held annual wakes at his grave, toasting the old fraud every July 8th. There have been actual seances attempting to contact him. Con men from Chapter 5 reaching across the veil to a con man from Chapter 6, presumably to discuss territory. And the soap trick itself never died. Carnival grifters ran money in the soap and its cousins deep into the 20th century. And its direct descendant, the prize inside the mystery box, the loot crate with a chance of the jackpot, is now a billion-dollar mechanic in video games your kids play. Soapy would need about 10 minutes of orientation to run a modern app store. Cleveland, Ohio, around 1897, a middle-aged woman with a soft Canadian accent arrives in town and marries a respectable, extremely naive doctor named Leroy Chadwick. Her name that week, is Cassie Chadwick. What Dr. Chadwick doesn't know is that his new wife has already been in previous seasons a fortune teller named Madame Lydia DeVere, a clairvoyant named Madame Marie LaRose, and a convicted forger who did time in a penitentiary. Cassie has spent her whole life practicing for one big role, and in Cleveland, she finally stages it. The play opens in New York City. Cassie arranges to share a carriage ride with a prominent Cleveland lawyer and asks him to wait while she pops into a mansion on Fifth Avenue, the mansion of Andrew Carnegie, the Steel King, one of the 2 or 3 richest men alive. She's inside for half an hour. What's she doing in there? Chatting with the housekeeper, pretending to check a maid's references. But the lawyer doesn't know that. He just sees the door of Carnegie's mansion open for her. And as she climbs back into the carriage, she lets a piece of paper flutter to the floor. Oops, a promissory note signed Andrew Carnegie for $2 million. Flustered, blushing, she swears the lawyer to secrecy and then tells him everything. She is Andrew Carnegie's illegitimate daughter. The great man is so ashamed of his secret that he showers her with money, millions in notes and securities, and she'll inherit hundreds of millions more when he dies. He must never be asked about it, obviously, a gentleman's discretion. The lawyer keeps the secret the way all men keep secrets. He tells everyone important he knows, which was the entire point. And now, watch the machine run. Cassie walks into Ohio banks and does the thing every con artist dreams of. She doesn't ask for money. She deposits the forged Carnegie notes for safekeeping. Then, she borrows against them. And the bankers, knowing who her father is, knowing this cannot be checked without insulting Andrew Carnegie, fall over themselves to lend. Better yet, some lend at absurd, predatory interest rates, figuring the naive heiress won't notice. Read that again. The bankers thought they were scamming her. Greed on greed. She took out loans that in today's money run to tens of millions of dollars, and she spent it. 30 carriages, rooms full of jewelry, a gold-plated organ, dinner parties that made the papers, trips to Europe. Cleveland called her the Queen of Ohio. This ran for 7 years. It ended the way it had to. One Boston banker finally got nervous and demanded repayment, the dominoes fell, and in November 1904, a newspaper printed the question no one had dared ask out loud. Has anyone actually asked Carnegie? Someone asked Carnegie. Carnegie's reply? Roughly, I have never heard of this woman in my life. He also noted, reviewing the forged notes, that whoever wrote them had misspelled words he tended not to misspell, and that he hadn't signed a promissory note in decades. The Citizens National Bank of Oberlin, which had lent her more than its entire capital, collapsed. Depositors were ruined. Cassie was arrested in New York in a hotel bed, reportedly with a money belt containing $100,000. At her trial in 1905, the courtroom was a circus, and in the audience, watching quietly, sat Andrew Carnegie himself. He'd come, he said, to finally get a look at his daughter. She got 10 years. She died in prison 2 years later on her birthday. The best measure of how good she was, after her arrest, banks across Ohio quietly checked their vaults and kept finding more Carnegie notes. She'd been running the same play, bank after bank, and every single banker had thought he was the only one holding the golden secret. Cassie's earlier seasons deserve a quick flashback, because the Carnegie play didn't come from nowhere. It was refined through years of workshopping. As Madame Lydia de Vere, clairvoyant, she'd already learned the core trick. People will pay a stranger who claims access to hidden knowledge. She practiced forging, was convicted, and served time in an Ohio penitentiary, where, incredibly, she was pardoned, in part thanks to a campaign for her release because she'd convinced people in prison, too. Between schemes, she married respectable men the way other people rent office space. The marriage was the credential. And once the Carnegie machine was humming, the spending became its own advertisement. The newspapers later inventoried her home with the relish of a heist film. Rooms of furs, trays of diamonds, that famous gold organ, dinner services for parties of 100. Cleveland society competed to attend. The spending wasn't a weakness of the scheme, it was the scheme. Every chandelier was a reference letter. When it all collapsed, the papers crowned her with headlines, the queen of frauds, her trial front page news across America, crowds fighting for courtroom seats. Banks in 3 states quietly wrote off Chadwick paper, and the phrase bankers used afterward for a loan backed by nothing but a borrower's aura, Chadwick collateral, floated around Ohio banking for years, a little tombstone in the language. Andrew Carnegie, for his part, never pressed charges. He reportedly found the whole thing rather flattering. Boston, 1919. A dapper little Italian immigrant, 5'2", endless charm, magnificent suits he can't afford, is answering mail at a desk when he notices something odd tucked in an envelope from Spain. An international reply coupon. A little slip of paper, invented so you could prepay return postage across countries. And Charles Ponzi has a thought that will eventually put his name in the dictionary. Because of the post-war currency chaos, a coupon bought for pennies in Rome is redeemable for several times more in Boston. Buy coupons cheap abroad, redeem them dear in America. A guaranteed, legal, riskless profit. Arbitrage. On paper, it actually works. Remember that phrase? On paper. Ponzi does some math, gets dizzy with joy, and starts collecting money from friends. His offer, 50% profit in 45 days. Double your money in 90. In Boston in 1920, when a bank pays you 5% a year. The money starts as a trickle, then becomes a physics experiment, because early investors get paid on time, in full, and paid investors talk. Waiters, widows, priests, cops, 3/4 of the Boston police force by some accounts invested. Lines wrapped around the block at his securities exchange company on School Street. At the peak in the summer of 1920, Ponzi was taking in roughly $1 million a week. Cash was literally overflowing the desks. They stuffed it in drawers, closets, waste paper baskets. He bought a mansion, a locomobile, a bank. He bought the very bank that had once refused him a loan, walked in, and became its president. The tiny problem: the coupon business never existed. Oh, the idea existed, but to actually back the money he'd taken in, Ponzi would have needed something like 160 million coupons in circulation. Total coupons existing on planet Earth at the time, about 27,000. He'd looked into actually doing it, found out the redemption process was hopeless, and quietly pivoted to the older, simpler business model. Pay old investors with new investors' money, and keep the line moving. He didn't invent that scheme. Swindlers had run it for decades, but he ran it so big, so publicly, so gloriously that it took his name and never gave it back. The end came in slow motion, over one Boston summer. A financial journalist named Clarence Barron, founder of Barron's, did the coupon math in public. The Boston Post started digging. Ponzi hired a publicity man who took one look at the books and went straight to the newspapers. Then, the the Post found the skeleton in the closet. Mugshots. Ponzi had done prison time in Montreal years earlier for forgery, working at a bank that ran on exactly this rob Peter to pay Paul model.
Front page. The run began. And here's the moment that tells you why cons work. As panicked crowds besieged his office demanding refunds, Ponzi came out, smiling, handing out coffee and donuts, telling them their money was safe. Many in the crowd put their money back in. Some cheered him. The man was under investigation by every authority in Massachusetts, and people were still buying. When it finally collapsed in August 1920, about $20 million was gone. $250 million in today's money. 6 banks failed. Investors eventually got back around 30 cents on the dollar. Ponzi did his prison time, got deported to Italy, tried a few more schemes, and died in 1949 in a charity hospital in Rio de Janeiro with $75 to his name. Enough, exactly, to pay for his own funeral.
His last recorded words to a reporter are perfect. He said, even if they never got anything for it, the people of Boston got a show. It was easily worth $15 million to watch me put the thing over. The showman's final invoice. And somewhere in every decade since, every guaranteed return, every this time it's different, Charles Ponzi collects his royalty. Ponzi's after story is a con museum all by itself. Out on bail during his appeals, needing money, you'll never guess. He surfaced in Florida in 1925 under the name Sharpon. Charles Ponzi, syllables rearranged, the alias equivalent of a fake mustache, selling swampland to the land boom crowd.
His pitch promised investors 200% in 60 days because a man has a brand to maintain. Some of the prime lots were literally underwater. Florida convicted him. He jumped bail, was caught on a ship in Texas working as a waiter after shaving his head and growing that mustache for real, and finally served out his Massachusetts time. Deported to Italy in 1934. Crowds and reporters saw him off at the dock like a celebrity, and he waved. He tried banking schemes under Mussolini, failed upward for a while, and eventually got a job in Rio de Janeiro through a cousin, business manager for the Brazilian branch of Italy's national airline. For a few years, the world's most famous fraudster held a normal job with a salary. Colleagues reportedly found him meticulous and honest, which might be the strangest fact in this entire video. The war killed the airline, his health failed, and he ended, as we said, in the charity ward. But the brand thrived without him. Within his own lifetime, Ponzi's scheme had entered courtrooms and dictionaries as a common noun. Lawyers prosecuting men Ponzi never met were calling their crimes Ponzi schemes while Ponzi was still alive to read about it. Very few humans get to become a word. Fewer still get to become a warning label. Paris, spring of 1925. In a suite at the Hôtel de Crillon, one of the most expensive addresses in Europe, 5 of France's biggest scrap metal dealers open an unusual letter. It's from the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs, on official government stationery marked confidential. The Deputy Director General requests a discreet meeting about a matter of national importance. The man who greets them at the Crillon is elegant, multilingual, with a dueling scar on his cheek and the unhurried confidence of old money. His name this month is Victor Lustig. The confidential matter? The government has decided to demolish the Eiffel Tower. He lets that land. Gentlemen, he explains, the tower was built for the 1889 World's Fair and was never meant to be permanent. It's rusting. Maintenance costs are a scandal. The papers complain about it constantly, which is true, they did. Rather than face public outrage, the government will sell it quietly, for scrap. 7,000 tons of iron, and you 5 have been selected to bid. It is, when you think about it, the perfect lie. The Eiffel Tower was controversial. Artists had petitioned against it for decades, calling it a metal asparagus. It genuinely was temporary. Every fact a mark could check. Checked out! Lustig ran the auction like a maestro, but his real target was one specific bidder, André Poisson, a dealer from the provinces, desperate to break into the Parisian big leagues. Insecure, hungry, perfect. And when Poisson's wife grew suspicious,
Why all this secrecy? Lustig produced his masterstroke. He took Poisson aside, lowered his voice, and confessed. You know how it is, monsieur. A government official's salary is small. He asked for a bribe, and that sealed it. Because a fake official doesn't ask for a bribe. A corrupt, real official does. The bribe was the authenticity. Poisson paid for the tower, paid the bribe on top, and Lustig was on the train to Vienna with a suitcase of cash before the ink dried. Then, silence. No scandal, no police. Poisson was too humiliated to report it. The shame insurance from Chapter 1 paying out perfectly. And Lustig, reading the Paris papers in Vienna and finding nothing, did the most Lustig thing imaginable. He came back and sold the Eiffel Tower again. Second auction, 5 new dealers. This time, the mark went to the police, and Lustig had to flee to America, where his greatest hits kept coming. He sold thousands of Romanian money boxes, a beautiful mahogany machine that printed perfect $100 bills, demonstrated with real ones hidden inside. 6 hours per bill. Marks paid tens of thousands for a box of blank paper. The 6-hour delay was the getaway, built into the product. And then there's the Capone story. Lustig walked into Al Capone's office, a man who solved disputes with baseball bats, and asked him to invest $50,000 in a stock deal. 2 months later, he came back. Mr. Capone, the deal fell through, and he returned every dollar. Capone, stunned that an honest man existed in Chicago, handed him $5,000 for his trouble, which was the entire plan. There was never a stock deal. He kept the money in a safe for 2 months. He conned Al Capone by being honest at him. It said Lustig kept a personal code, the 10 commandments of the con. Be a patient listener. Never look bored. Wait for the other person to reveal their politics, then agree. Never be untidy. Never get drunk. Never boast. Let your importance be quietly obvious. The uncomfortable read? It's basically a manual for being charming. The best version of what a good listener looks like, weaponized. The end? Counterfeiting. The real kind, printing money at industrial scale, finally brought the Secret Service down on him. Arrested in 1935, he escaped federal detention in New York the day before his trial, climbing down a rope of knotted bedsheets and cheerfully pretending to be a window washer, wiping the windows as he descended in front of a street full of pedestrians. Recaptured in Pittsburgh a month later, he got 20 years. And where do you put a man who can talk his way through anything? The one prison built to be immune to charm. Alcatraz, the Rock. He died in prison custody in 1947. On the death certificate, under occupation, someone wrote apprentice salesman. The Eiffel Tower, meanwhile, is still standing, still rusting, still repainted every 7 years. 7,000 tons of iron, and the lightest thing about it is how easily it was sold. Lustig's supporting cast stories are too good to leave in the archive. The Secret Service, who hunted him for years, called him the Count. He collected aliases the way other men collect stamps, at least 45 of them, and was arrested dozens of times across Europe and America, talking his way out again and again. The Romanian money box had a perfect epilogue. He sold one to a Texas sheriff for thousands of dollars. And when the sheriff, having cranked out his 6 hours of blank paper, tracked him down in Chicago, furious, gun presumably nearby, Lustig didn't run. He talked. He convinced the lawman he'd simply been operating the machine incorrectly, apologized for the inconvenience, and refunded him in full. In counterfeit bills. The sheriff was later arrested in New Orleans for passing him. The man got conned coming and going by the same artist with the same money. And Lustig's transatlantic liner years, you work the luxury ships between wars because a first-class deck is a fish pond of rich men with time, boredom, and champagne, gave him his favorite hunting method. Never approach anyone. Sit alone, elegant, slightly mysterious, visibly not needing company. And let the marks introduce themselves. Commandment material. The whole philosophy in one image. The fisherman who baits the hook with his own indifference. Even his Alcatraz file stays in character. Fellow inmates and guards remembered him as unfailingly polite, well-spoken, helpful in the library. Of course they did. There was no percentage in being anything else. And Victor Lustig never once worked without a percentage. Here's a riddle. What's the most boring object in your house? The matchstick. A splinter of wood and a dab of chemicals worth nothing. Now, what if I told you that in the 1920s, one man used matchsticks to take over the finances of half the planet, lending money to entire nations, and that when he fell, the crash was so enormous that America had to invent modern financial regulation to make sure it never happened again? Meet Ivar Kruger, Sweden's Match King. Kruger starts legitimate, more than legitimate, brilliant. A trained engineer, he modernizes his family's match business until Swedish Match is a machine. But his real invention is financial. In the broke, rebuilding Europe of the 1920s, governments are desperate for dollars. American investors are desperate for returns. Kruger becomes the pipe connecting them. He borrows cheap from Wall Street, lends huge sums to governments, and in exchange, each government grants him a national match monopoly. Germany, France, Poland, Greece, Ecuador, more than a dozen countries. He lent Germany $125 million, France $75 million. A private businessman bailing out nations, secured by the fact that every cigarette and every stove in that country would light with his match. At his peak, Kruger controlled some 200 companies and roughly 3/4 of the world's match production. Banks begged to lend to him. His securities were the most widely held in America. The press called him the savior of Europe. Economists proposed him for the Nobel Peace Prize. One problem: the returns he was paying investors, often 20-25% dividends, were bigger than the profits of the underlying business. You know this song by now. You learned it 2 chapters ago from a little Italian gentleman in Boston. New investors' money paid old investors' dividends. But Kruger's version had a twist Ponzi never dreamed of. The paperwork looked impeccable because Kruger built a corporate structure so deliberately tangled, hundreds of subsidiaries in Liechtenstein, holding companies inside holding companies, that no accountant alive could follow the money.
When auditors asked questions, he'd smile and explain that secrecy was his competitive advantage. Investors loved the mystery. Confidence, remember? He kept the machine fed with sheer nerve. He invented dual-class shares, B shares with a fraction of the voting rights, so he could raise oceans of money without losing control. Finance still uses that invention every day, by the way. Every tech founder with super voting stock owes a quiet royalty to the Match King. And when even that wasn't enough, in 1929, the machine crossed its final line. Kruger personally forged 42 Italian government bonds, scrawling the same official signature, misspelled in slightly different ways, on bonds worth over $100 million, and used them as collateral. Hand-forged by the richest man in Europe, at his kitchen table, so to speak. Then came the crash of 1929, and the music slowed. Credit froze, the loans to governments couldn't be called in. You can't repossess Germany. Through 1930 and 31, Kruger burned cash keeping up appearances, paying dividends out of pure fiction, while privately writing that he was so tired he could barely think. In March 1932, bankers demanded a full accounting at last. On March 12th, in his Paris apartment, hours before the meeting, Ivar Kruger bought a pistol, lay down on his bed, and shot himself through the heart. The unraveling took years. Auditors found a black hole in the accounts equal to billions in today's money, Swedish GDP scale losses. Tens of thousands of American families who held his safe securities were wiped out, on top of everything the Depression was already doing to them. The scandal was so vast that the U.S. Congress, mid-hearing, wrote it directly into law. The Securities Act of 1933, mandatory audited financial statements, the entire architecture of modern disclosure, much of it is anti-Kruger technology. Every quarterly report you've ever skimmed exists partly because of the Match King. The final irony, buried under the fraud, there was a real company.
Swedish Match, the actual factories, the actual matches, survived the crater, was rebuilt, and exists to this day. The business was real. The empire was real. Only the numbers were fiction. Kruger's biographers still argue about him. Was he a con artist who built companies as props? Or a genuine industrial genius who started lying when the world stopped cooperating? With Ponzi, the answer was simple. With Kruger, the honest answer is both. And that should scare you more. 2 more rooms in the Kruger wing. First, the throne room. His Stockholm headquarters, the Match Palace, was one of the most beautiful office buildings in Europe. Marble, murals, a boardroom with doors of inlaid wood. And in his private office sat his most honest piece of furniture. A telephone with a row of buttons that connected to nothing. During meetings with bankers and journalists, Kruger would be interrupted by calls, a button discreetly pressed under the desk, and visitors would sit in respectful silence while he soothed in 3 languages what was apparently the Prime Minister of Poland or the Bank of France. The calls were dead air. The performance was the collateral. Investors walked out of that office and wired him millions, having personally witnessed a man too busy saving Europe to fully attend their meeting. It's Soapy's telegraph office upgraded to teak. Second room, the epilogue. When it all came down, the wreckage reached everywhere. His brother went to prison, the great auditing firms were humiliated, and one theory holds that Sweden's entire cautious, disclosure-obsessed corporate culture is a national scar from 1932. For decades afterward, some loyalists insisted Kruger was murdered in Paris, that the books could have been saved, that the empire was one refinancing away from survival. The files, opened over the following decades, said otherwise. But notice the shape of that loyalty. It's Poyet's investors defending McGregor, spiritualists explaining away Maggie's toes. The very best cons don't just take the money. They take a permanent residence in the victim's identity, because admitting the con means demolishing the self that believed it. The con artist moves out. The belief stays and pays rent forever. December 10th, 2008. A 70-year-old man sits down with his 2 adult sons in his Manhattan apartment and tells them the family business. The legendary investment firm with their name on the door. The firm managing $65 billion for charities, universities, pension funds, Hollywood directors, Holocaust survivors is, quote, one big lie. There is no trading. There has been no trading, possibly for decades. It is, he says, using the little Italian gentleman's name like every fraud since 1920 must, one giant Ponzi scheme. The sons call a lawyer, the lawyer calls the FBI, and the next morning, Bernie Madoff, former chairman of the NASDAQ Stock Exchange, pillar of Wall Street, opens his door and says the sentence every con artist keeps folded in a back pocket. There is no innocent explanation. The Madoff con deserves its place in this story, not because it was clever, but because of where it lived. Soapy Smith needed a lawless frontier town. Madoff ran his game from the 17th floor of a Manhattan tower, inside the most regulated financial market on Earth, for at least 17 years. So financial analyst named Harry Markopoulos figured out the fraud in 1999. It took him 5 minutes with the return numbers, he said, to know it was fake, because Madoff's returns went up in a smooth, gentle line, in all market weather, which real markets simply do not do. Markopoulos wrote to the SEC in 2000, and 2001, and 2005. That one was literally titled, "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud." Nothing happened. Because here's the Madoff innovation, and listen closely, because it's the oldest trick in this entire video wearing a suit. He made himself exclusive. Madoff didn't chase investors. He turned people down. Getting your money in was a privilege, a country club whisper, a favor arranged through a friend. Nobody audits a door, they beg to get through. It's the velvet rope as financial engineering. The same move as Lustig's confidential letters and Cassie Chadwick's secret you must never ask Carnegie about. Secrecy isn't how they avoid the con being checked. Secrecy is the con. When the 2008 crisis hit and everyone needed cash at once, the machine did what all such machines do. $65 billion in statement value evaporated. About $19 billion of it real principal. Charities closed. At least 2 people took their own lives, including one of his sons. Madoff got 150 years and died in prison in 2021. The trustee clawing back the money, incredibly, recovered most of the real principal over the following decade. One of history's greatest cleanup operations. Far too late for the people who mattered. And now, the promise twist. Because this chapter is called The Longest Con, and Madoff's 17 plus years is not the longest con in it. In 2002, Steven Spielberg made a beloved movie, Catch Me If You Can. Leonardo DiCaprio as Frank Abagnale Jr., the teenage genius who passed as a Pan Am pilot, a Georgia doctor, a Louisiana lawyer, cashing $2.5 million in forged checks across 26 countries while the FBI chased him around the globe, before becoming the Bureau's beloved fraud consultant. Incredible story. He told it for 40 years. Best-selling memoir, the movie, decades of corporate lectures at up to tens of thousands of dollars a talk, security consulting for banks, and even government agencies. And then researchers and journalists, most thoroughly a writer named Alan Logan in 2020, went through the actual records, court documents, prison files, Pan Am archives, and found that during most of the years Frank was supposedly jet-setting as a pilot and running hospital wards, he was in prison. The FBI manhunt across 26 countries, no evidence it happened. The great con man's great cons largely never occurred. His real documented crimes were small, sad, ordinary ones. Sit with this one, because it's the perfect ending to the gallery. A man who built a 40-year career, a fortune, and a Hollywood monument on the claim of being a legendary con artist, and the claim itself was the con.
He didn't sell fake stocks or a fake bridge. He sold a fake himself. And the buyers were all of us, popcorn in hand. The lie about lying was the most profitable lie of all. Somewhere, Princess Caribou is applauding. A Madoff footnote that belongs in a psychology textbook. Prison did not end the performance. At Butner Federal Prison, by multiple accounts, Madoff became a celebrity inmate. Fellow prisoners asked for financial advice, and he reportedly cornered the commissary market in hot chocolate, buying up the supply to trade at a markup. $65 billion of fraud. And the machine underneath? Spot the demand, control the supply, be the indispensable man, kept running on cocoa packets.
He also, in interviews, kept relitigating his legacy. The banks knew, the clients were greedy, he'd wanted to get caught. Every con artist's memoir has the same 3 chapters. And the Marco Polo's angle deserves one more beat, because it answers the question everyone asks. How did nobody see it? Somebody saw it, repeatedly, in writing, with math. The SEC opened inquiries and closed them. Investigators checked whether Madoff's paperwork was tidy, and it was gorgeous. Remember the rubber stamps on the Brooklyn Bridge deeds? What almost nobody did was make the one phone call to the clearinghouse to confirm the trades existed. One call, 17 years. The trades did not exist. There's your lesson, sharper than any regulation. Fraud almost never survives independent verification of the underlying thing. The coupon count, the jungle where the city should be, the wire behind the telegraph office. Which is why every con, without exception, is engineered to make that one boring check feel rude, paranoid, or beneath you. Whenever checking feels impolite, check twice. So here we are, tonight. Your phone is on your nightstand, and inside it, right now, every single con in this video is alive and running. Let's do the roll call. The Spanish prisoner, that 16th century letter about the imprisoned nobleman and his reward, you know it as the Nigerian prince email. Same script, 4 centuries of patina. It reads as ridiculous on purpose, by the way. Researchers argue the absurdity is a filter, so that only the most trusting, most hopeful people reply. The put up, automated. Gregor McGregor's Poyer, a paradise investment that doesn't exist? Today it's called a rug pull. In 2021, a cryptocurrency named after the show Squid Game rocketed thousands of % in days. Press coverage, gorgeous website, a token you could buy, but small detail, not sell. The developers vanished with millions. Poyas bonds at the speed of light. There were tens of thousands of similar token scams that year alone. Princess Caribou and the fake Anastasia, the aristocrat who isn't. Her name in 2017 was Anna Delvey, the fake German heiress who floated through Manhattan on wire transfer promises, conning hotels, banks, and the entire social scene, and whose story became, of course, a hit TV series. The princess business has never once had a recession. The Fox sisters' ghost business? Psychic services remain a multi-billion-dollar industry, and the mediums have television shows now. Soapy Smith's fake telegraph office, infrastructure that connects to nothing. Today, it's the fake trading platform. Romance scammers? This is the one to warn your family about. It's called pig butchering. Spend weeks building love and trust by text, then guide the victim to a beautiful professional crypto exchange app where their investments grow daily. The app is the telegraph office. The wires end in the wall. The numbers on the screen are hand-typed by the scammer, right up until the victim tries to withdraw. Americans alone now lose billions, with a B, to romance and investment scams every year, more than to any other fraud category. And the true number is higher because, say it with me now, shame keeps the evidence home. Cassie Chadwick's secret Carnegie inheritance, every exclusive pre-IPO opportunity whispered in a group chat. Ponzi? Madoff was yesterday. The next one is fundraising right now somewhere with beautiful, smooth returns. And Victor Lustig's fake government letter? Check your spam folder. The IRS, the tax office, the delivery company, all needing a small, urgent payment. The Fire Festival of 2017 deserves its own line, a luxury island music festival sold through supermodels on Instagram that turned out to be disaster relief tents and a sad cheese sandwich, because it proved the modern upgrade. You no longer need to con people one carriage ride at a time. Social proof scales now. One influencer post is 1,000 Andre Poissons. So, after 10,000 years, wrong video. After 500 years of this gallery, what actually protects you? Not intelligence. We've established that bankers, judges, and Al Capone all donated to this museum. The real armor is boring, and it's 3 sentences. 1, anything urgent and secret is neither. Real opportunities survive a night's sleep and a second opinion. Cons evaporate under both, which is exactly why every con forbids them. 2, unusual payment method equals scam. Nobody legitimate has ever needed gift cards, wire transfers, or crypto sent to an address ever, once in history. 3, and this is the hard one. When you realize it's happening, the shame belongs to them, not you. Report it, tell people. Every con in this video survived on victims staying quiet, from Mr. Thompson's watch in 1849 to the pig butchering text your uncle bought this morning. Silence is their business model. Break it. And with that, the museum is closing for the night. The gift shop, naturally, is a scam. If you enjoyed the tour, there's a whole video on why humans trust little pieces of paper in the first place. Money and cons are the same story told twice, and it's playing right after this one. Get some sleep. Don't trust the raps. And if a well-dressed stranger ever asks whether you have the confidence to trust him with your watch until tomorrow, you tell him you know exactly what time it is. Good night. One final upgrade to the armor before the museum lights go out, because the machines have learned new tricks since Madoff. The grandparent scam. A panicked late-night call. "Grandma, it's me. I'm in jail. Please don't tell Mom." Now arrives with the grandchild's actual voice, cloned by AI from 30 seconds of social media video. The Spanish prisoner has learned to sound exactly like your family. Job scams text you a flattering offer for remote work that begins with small, real payments. The modern version of Ponzi paying his first investors, building the trust before the touch. The wrong number text that blossoms into friendship over weeks is a pig butchering script written by trafficked workers in fraud compounds. Today's con artists are, in one of history's darkest ironies, often victims themselves, imprisoned behind fences and forced to run romance scams on quota. And the defense against all of it stays humiliatingly analog. Families now set a code word, a question no voice clone can answer, agreed at the dinner table. Banks train tellers to ask elderly customers wiring money one question. Have you met this person face to face? Verification, verification, verification. The most advanced fraud in history still dies instantly on contact with one independent check. Same as a fake city in a real jungle, same as a gold watch on Broadway in 1849. The tools are new, the lock has never changed, and now you own the key. Sleep well, and this week, teach the code word to someone you love. Consider it your ticket price for the museum.